Jungkook risks everything for Jimin, but one final choice threatens to rewrite their destiny forever in this emotional tale of love and sacrifice. "Don't sign it, Jungkook." Jimin's desperate scream shattered the suffocating silence of the grand courtroom just as the silver fountain pen touched the final line of the contract. Every face in the chamber turned toward the trembling young man standing beneath the towering oak doors, rainwater dripping from his dark coat and forming tiny puddles on the polished marble floor. Jungkook slowly lifted his eyes from the document that would erase his name from one of the most powerful family corporations in the country. His fingers tightened around the pen, but his gaze remained fixed only on Jimin. For a heartbeat, the world disappeared. The lawyers, the executives, the flashing cameras, and the whispers of reporters faded into meaningless echoes. All he could see was Jimin's pale face, his uneven breathing, and the fear that neither of them had ever spoken aloud. Jungkook had prepared himself to lose his fortune, his inheritance, and the family that had raised him. He had not prepared himself to see Jimin look at him as though he were about to disappear forever. Chairman Han leaned back in his chair with cold amusement. "You're late," he said calmly, his voice carrying effortlessly through the silent hall. "The contract is already decided." Jimin took another step forward despite the security guards reaching for his arm. "Then let him hear the truth before he gives up everything." A ripple of confusion spread across the room. Jungkook frowned. Jimin had never sounded like this before. There was urgency in his voice, but beneath it hid something heavier, something that had haunted him for years. Chairman Han's expression darkened for only a fraction of a second before returning to its familiar mask of authority. "Remove him." Two guards advanced immediately, but Jungkook's voice stopped them. "Nobody touches him." His words were quiet, yet powerful enough to freeze everyone in place. Even Chairman Han hesitated. Jungkook placed the pen on the table and slowly walked toward Jimin. Every step echoed like thunder against the marble floor. When they finally stood face to face, neither of them spoke for several seconds. Jimin's hands trembled violently. Jungkook noticed fresh bruises hidden beneath the sleeve of his jacket. His heartbeat accelerated. "Who did this?" Jungkook whispered. Jimin looked away. "It doesn't matter. It matters to me." Jimin closed his eyes. "Everything you've believed for the last 10 years was built on a lie." The sentence struck Jungkook harder than any physical blow. His memories flashed uncontrollably through his mind. The day his parents died, the endless years under Chairman Han's strict control, the promise he had made to protect the family name no matter the cost, every sacrifice, every lonely birthday. Every sleepless night spent believing there had been no other choice. Jimin slowly reached into his soaked coat and removed a small leather envelope that had clearly been protected from the rain. The edges were worn as though it had been carried for years. "Your mother gave this to me before she died." Jungkook stared without blinking. "That's impossible." Jimin swallowed painfully. She knew they were coming. The courtroom fell silent once again. Chairman Han rose from his chair so suddenly that it scraped loudly across the floor. "Enough." His voice was sharper now, stripped of its calm confidence. "You have no idea what you're talking about." But Jimin ignored him completely. His attention never left Jungkook. "She told me to wait until the day you were ready to lose everything for someone else." Tears filled his eyes. "She believed that only then would you finally become stronger than the family that tried to own you." Jungkook's hands shook as he accepted the envelope. It felt surprisingly heavy, not because of its weight, but because of everything it represented. His fingers hesitated over the wax seal, which carried the faded emblem of his mother's favorite flower instead of the family crest. He remembered that flower instantly. White camellias. She had planted them every spring behind their old countryside house before the mansion, before the wealth, before power had consumed everything. Carefully, Jungkook broke the seal. Inside rested a handwritten letter and a tiny silver key no longer than his thumb. The handwriting was unmistakable. His mother's elegant script flowed across the page with gentle confidence. "My dearest son, if you are reading this, it means someone finally loved you enough to risk losing you. Never trust the story they told you about our family. The greatest inheritance I leave behind isn't money. It's the truth hidden where the camellias bloom." Jungkook's vision blurred instantly. He had spent years convincing himself he no longer remembered her voice, yet every word sounded exactly like she was speaking beside him. Across the courtroom, Chairman Han's calm facade finally cracked. For the first time in decades, genuine fear appeared in his eyes. He stared not at the letter, but at the tiny silver key. Whatever it opened was clearly something he had desperately hoped would remain buried forever. Jungkook slowly folded the letter against his chest. The contract that promised unimaginable wealth no longer seemed important. The inheritance, the company, and the luxurious future waiting for him suddenly felt meaningless compared to the single question echoing relentlessly inside his heart. What truth had his mother protected with her final breath, and why had Jimin carried that burden alone for so many years? The old countryside estate looked nothing like the place Jungkook remembered. Thick vines had swallowed the iron gates, broken windows reflected the grey afternoon sky, and the once beautiful white camellia garden had become a sea of tangled branches and wild grass. The air smelled of damp earth, rotting leaves, and memories that refused to die. Jungkook stood motionless outside the rusted entrance, the tiny silver key clenched tightly in his palm until its edges pressed painfully into his skin. Jimin stopped beside him without saying a word. For years he had imagined this moment, but now that they were finally here, every step toward the abandoned house felt heavier than the last. Silence settled between them, not the silence of strangers, but of two people carrying wounds too deep for language. "I should have brought you here years ago," Jimin whispered. Jungkook kept his eyes on the garden. "You promised my mother you would wait." "I did. And you kept that promise even after everything they did to you." Jimin lowered his head. "I wasn't protecting the secret anymore," his voice trembled. "I was protecting you." Jungkook finally looked at him. "From what?" "The truth changes people." A cold breeze swept through the camellias, scattering white petals across the cracked stone path. Jungkook remembered running through that same garden as a child while his mother laughed from the porch. He remembered hiding behind the flowers whenever thunderstorms frightened him. He remembered a melody she used to hum every evening, a melody he had not thought about in years until now. The memories returned so vividly that his chest tightened. They pushed open the gate. The rusty hinges screamed into the silence. Every step deeper into the property awakened another forgotten memory, the wooden swing where his father had taught him to count stars, the small fountain where his mother washed paintbrushes after spending afternoons painting flowers, the old oak tree where a tiny birdhouse still hung crookedly from one branch. Nothing had truly disappeared. Time had only hidden it. Jimin suddenly stopped walking. There, near the oldest camellia bush, stood a weathered stone statue of an angel whose wings had broken long ago. Jungkook stared. "I remember this." His mother had always insisted nobody move the statue. She used to smile whenever anyone asked why. "Some things," she would always say, "should stay exactly where they belong." Jungkook knelt before the statue. His trembling fingers brushed away years of moss until a small brass keyhole emerged beneath the stone base. His heartbeat accelerated. The silver key fit perfectly. For one brief second, neither of them moved. Then Jungkook slowly turned it. A deep metallic click echoed beneath the ground. The earth itself seemed to groan. Hidden gears, untouched for decades, began shifting below the garden. The statue slid several inches sideways, revealing a narrow stone staircase descending into darkness. A rush of cold air escaped from below. It carried the scent of old paper, cedar wood, and dust trapped for countless years. Jimin swallowed nervously. "I've never been inside." "You had the key." "I promised your mother I would never use it." Jungkook looked at him with quiet gratitude. "You kept every promise. I almost broke them." "When?" Jimin smiled sadly. "The night I thought I'd lost you forever." Without another word, Jungkook switched on the flashlight from his phone and stepped into the underground passage. Each stone stair creaked beneath his weight. The deeper they descended, the quieter the world above became until only their breathing remained. At the bottom waited a heavy wooden door reinforced with iron. Unlike the neglected house above, this room had been perfectly preserved. Jungkook pushed the door open. The flashlight beam swept across shelves lined with journals, paintings wrapped in cloth, locked wooden boxes, and dozens of neatly labeled files. Everything looked untouched, as though someone had simply stepped outside and intended to return tomorrow. On the center table rested a single framed photograph. Jungkook froze. It showed his parents smiling beside another couple. The second couple had their arms wrapped around a little boy no older than 5. The child was laughing directly at the camera. Jungkook stared at the familiar face. It wasn't his. It was Jimin. His breathing stopped. He picked up the photograph with shaking hands. "Why?" he whispered. His voice cracked. "Why are you in our family picture?" Jimin slowly approached until he stood beside him. "I've never seen that photo before." Jungkook turned it over. Written neatly on the back, in his mother's unmistakable handwriting, were only 8 words. "Our sons will protect each other, whatever happens." The room suddenly felt unbearably small. Jungkook looked at Jimin as countless impossible questions collided inside his mind. What did she mean, our sons? Jimin could only stare back in stunned silence. Neither of them noticed the tiny red light blinking inside an old grandfather clock hidden in the corner of the room. Hundreds of miles away, inside Chairman Han's private office, an ancient receiver suddenly came alive. A soft electronic tone echoed through the empty room. One of his assistants looked down at the glowing monitor, his face draining of color. "So?" Chairman Han slowly lifted his eyes. "What is it?" The assistant swallowed hard. "The underground archive has been opened." For the first time in decades, Chairman Han did not answer. He simply stood, walked toward the window overlooking the city skyline, and closed his eyes. "The past," he murmured almost to himself, "has finally found them." Jungkook could not pull his eyes away from the photograph. Dust floated through the narrow beam of his flashlight, turning the underground archive into a place that felt suspended between the past and the present. His fingers trembled as they traced the smiling faces frozen in time. His mother rested one hand on his shoulder, while the woman beside her gently held young Jimin close. There was no distance between the two families, no formality, no hint of secrets. They looked like people who had trusted one another with their lives. "This can't be the first time our families met," Jungkook whispered. Jimin slowly shook his head. "I always believed I met your parents only once. But you're standing beside them. I don't remember any of it." Jungkook carefully placed the photograph back on the table before opening the nearest leather journal. The brittle pages released the faint scent of old ink and cedar. Every entry had been written in his mother's elegant handwriting. The first pages contained ordinary memories, family dinners, birthdays, sketches of white camellias, and tiny notes about Jungkook learning to ride a bicycle. Then the tone changed. "Someone is watching us." The sentence was underlined twice. Jungkook turned another page. "The company has become something I no longer recognize. Those who refuse are disappearing one by one." His breathing slowed. Another page. "If anything happens to us, Jungkook must never inherit this empire until he knows the truth." Jimin silently stood beside him, reading over his shoulder. Neither of them noticed that both had unconsciously begun holding their breath. The journal continued. "There are people inside the board who believe power is worth more than family. They call it sacrifice. I call it betrayal." Jungkook closed the book for a moment. His entire childhood had been built upon stories told by Chairman Han. Stories about duty, honor, legacy, responsibility. Now every memory felt unstable. Every lesson suddenly carried another meaning. Jimin walked deeper into the archive. Shelves stretched along the stone walls, filled with hundreds of carefully organized boxes. each bore dates reaching back more than 30 years. What was she collecting? He asked quietly. Jungkook joined him. It's more than journals. He opened one wooden box. Inside rested cassette tapes. Another contained dozens of photographs. Another held newspaper clippings with names circled in red ink. Many of the articles described mysterious resignations, unexplained accidents, and executives who had vanished from public life without explanation. Every headline connected somehow to the corporation chairman Han now controlled. Jimin felt a chill crawl across his spine. This wasn't just a family diary. No. Jungkook looked around the enormous hidden room. This is evidence. As those words left his mouth, something clicked in his memory. His mother had often disappeared into the garden late at night. Whenever he asked where she had gone, she would smile and say she was keeping tomorrow safe. He had always assumed she meant gardening. Now he understood. She had been preserving the truth. Jimin suddenly stopped in front of an old oak cabinet secured by another small lock. Unlike everything else in the archive, this cabinet looked newer. Its brass handle had barely tarnished. Jungkook inserted the silver key once more. It turned effortlessly. Inside rested only 3 objects: a velvet box, a sealed envelope, and a digital recorder. The recorder still contained enough battery to activate. Jungkook hesitated before pressing play. Static filled the room. Then a familiar voice emerged. His mother's. If you're hearing this, then both of you are together. Jungkook's knees nearly gave way. Jimin instinctively reached out to steady him. The recording continued. Jungkook, Jimin, if fate has brought you here, then it means my greatest wish survived longer than I ever expected. She paused. Her breathing sounded strained. I know you'll have questions, more questions than answers. Another pause. I wish I could explain everything face to face. The sound of distant thunder echoed through the recording. There is one truth you must never doubt. Her voice softened. You were never meant to stand against each other. Jungkook closed his eyes. Tears slid silently down his face. You were raised to protect one another. Jimin lowered his head. His own eyes had become wet. No matter what anyone tells you. The recorder crackled. Remember that love is always stronger than fear. Several seconds of silence followed. Then her voice became urgent. If Chairman Han discovers this archive before you do. The audio distorted violently. He will destroy. The recording abruptly cut off. Silence returned. Heavy. Unforgiving. Jungkook stared at the recorder as though willing it to continue. Nothing happened. Jimin carefully picked up the sealed envelope. Across its front, written in black ink, were only 2 names. Jungkook. Jimin. Together. Jimin looked toward Jungkook. I think she wanted us to open this together. Jungkook nodded slowly. They broke the seal at the same time. Inside was a folded map of the country marked with several locations connected by red lines. Tucked beneath the map lay another handwritten letter. Unlike the journals, this one was addressed directly to them. If you have found this, then the archive alone is no longer enough. The truth has been divided into 7 pieces. Trust no one who asks for them separately. Only when every piece is reunited will you understand why your fathers made the promise that changed all our lives. Jungkook unfolded the map completely. 7 red circles appeared across different cities. Each carried a handwritten symbol. One of them was a white camellia. Another resembled a lighthouse. Another was hidden within a mountain. At the bottom of the page, his mother's final sentence waited. Begin where the sea remembers. Neither Jungkook nor Jimin spoke. For the first time since entering the archive, they were no longer looking backward. They were looking toward a journey that had been planned for them long before either of them understood the weight of their own destinies. The sea greeted them with relentless waves crashing against black volcanic cliffs, each impact echoing like a heartbeat that had waited decades to be heard again. A cold wind swept across the shoreline, carrying the scent of salt, wet stone, and distant rain. Jungkook stood at the edge of the cliff, with the weathered map spread carefully between his hands. The first red circle pointed directly toward an abandoned lighthouse that had stood alone against the ocean for nearly a century. Its faded white paint had long surrendered to rust and storms, yet it remained unbroken, staring endlessly across the horizon as though guarding a secret no one else could see. "So this is where the sea remembers," Jimin murmured. Jungkook folded the map with deliberate care. "My mother never chose words without meaning." The narrow path leading to the lighthouse had nearly disappeared beneath overgrown grass. Every step forward felt strangely familiar, despite neither of them remembering ever visiting the place. The cries of seagulls circled overhead, while thick grey clouds swallowed the afternoon sunlight, casting the coastline into an eerie twilight. The lighthouse door resisted at first before opening with a deep groan. Dust danced through shafts of pale light filtering from cracked windows. Inside, spiral stairs climbed endlessly toward the lantern room, while the air carried the smell of old wood, sea salt, and machine oil that had seeped into the walls over generations. Jimin ran his fingers across the weathered railing. "It feels like someone was here recently." Jungkook noticed it too. Unlike the abandoned estate, this place showed signs of life. A fresh footprint marked the dusty floor. A lantern still contained unused oil. Someone had arrived before them. They exchanged a silent glance. Neither reached for words. Instead, they climbed. Each wooden step creaked beneath their weight until they reached the lantern chamber overlooking the endless ocean. The view stole their breath. Far below, waves crashed violently against jagged rocks, sending white spray high into the air. The entire coastline stretched endlessly beneath the darkening sky. But it wasn't the view that caught Jungkook's attention. It was the old brass telescope fixed toward the horizon. Something had been carved into its base. A white camellia. The exact same symbol from the map. Jungkook knelt beside it. Hidden beneath years of tarnish lay another tiny keyhole. He smiled faintly. "My mother really loved hiding answers." The silver key slipped perfectly into place once again. With a gentle turn, the telescope released a soft metallic click. Deep inside the lighthouse, unseen gears awakened. The entire floor vibrated. Jimin instinctively stepped backward as part of the wooden walls slowly rotated inward, revealing a narrow, hidden chamber no larger than a closet. Unlike the dusty lighthouse, this secret room remained perfectly clean. On a small table rested a leather-bound notebook and a crystal music box. The music box began playing the instant Jungkook lifted it. A delicate melody filled the chamber. Jungkook froze. "I know this song." Jimin looked at him. "It's the melody your mother used to hum." Jungkook nodded. But his expression changed. "You're humming it too." Only then did Jimin realize he had unconsciously joined the tune. He stopped immediately. "I've known this melody since I was little." "Who taught it to you?" "I don't remember." The realization settled heavily between them. Someone had taught them both the exact same lullaby. Years apart, without either understanding why. Jungkook carefully opened the notebook. The handwriting inside was different. It belonged to his father. If you have reached the lighthouse, then you've already discovered that memory is more fragile than truth. He continued reading. There are people who believe history can be rewritten simply by silencing witnesses. They are wrong. Memories survive in places, in music, in promises, and inside those who choose love over fear. Jungkook slowly turned another page. His father's handwriting grew hurried. If one day you begin doubting each other, return to the melody. It will remind you who you truly are. Jimin quietly lowered his eyes. Doubting each other. His voice barely escaped above a whisper. What if that's exactly what someone wanted? Jungkook looked up. What do you mean? Jimin hesitated. There were times after your parents died. His breathing became uneven. People approached me. Jungkook listened without interrupting. They told me you blamed my family. They said you hated me. They offered money if I stayed away from you forever. Jungkook felt something tighten painfully inside his chest. I never hated you. I know. But I believed staying away would protect you. Silence lingered between them. Years of distance suddenly made sense. Not because either had stopped caring, but because someone had carefully built walls between them. Jungkook stepped closer. You carried that alone. Jimin smiled sadly. So did you. For several moments, neither spoke. The music box continued playing its gentle melody as the wind outside howled against the lighthouse windows. Then Jungkook noticed something tucked beneath the final page of the notebook. A faded photograph. Unlike the cheerful family picture from the archive, this one showed 7 adults standing together in front of the lighthouse. His parents, Jimin's parents, and 3 unfamiliar faces. Across the bottom someone had written, "The 7 Keepers*." On the back appeared another sentence. "The second key belongs to the mountain." Before Jungkook could study it further, a sharp sound echoed from below. A door slammed. Footsteps. Several pairs. Moving quickly up the spiral staircase. Heavy boots struck the wooden steps one after another. Someone had found them. Jimin quietly extinguished the lantern. Darkness immediately swallowed the hidden chamber, except for thin streaks of fading daylight. The footsteps continued climbing. Closer, closer, until unfamiliar voices finally drifted upward through the lighthouse. They're here. Another voice answered coldly. Search every floor. Jungkook looked toward Jimin. Neither panic nor fear filled their eyes now. Only determination. Whatever truth their parents had hidden across the 7 locations, they were no longer the only ones searching for it. And whoever had arrived at the lighthouse was willing to reach it first. The footsteps echoed through the lighthouse like slow thunder, each step vibrating through the ancient wooden beams beneath Jungkook's feet. The hidden chamber had become almost completely dark, illuminated only by the weak gray light slipping through a narrow crack in the rotating wall. Jungkook could hear his own heartbeat, steady but heavy, while Jimin stood beside him with controlled breathing, his eyes fixed on the entrance. There are at least 5 of them, Jimin whispered so quietly the words barely reached Jungkook's ears. Jungkook nodded. They knew exactly where to look. The realization settled between them immediately. This was no coincidence. Someone had been following the trail left by Jungkook's parents. Outside the chamber, rough voices echoed through the circular room. Check behind every panel. They couldn't have disappeared. The boss wants the notebook. Another voice interrupted. And the map. Jungkook instinctively slipped the folded map inside his jacket. Jimin carefully picked up the crystal music box and wrapped it inside his coat. The notebook remained in Jungkook's hands. He stared at his father's final words for one brief second before closing it gently. The footsteps stopped. Someone was standing directly outside the hidden wall. Silence. A gloved hand brushed across the old wooden panels. Another knock followed. Solid. Methodical. They're in here. Without warning, a loud crash exploded through the room. The attackers rammed the rotating wall with a heavy metal bar. The hidden mechanism groaned under the impact. Again. Another strike. Splinters flew across the chamber. Jimin's pulse quickened. We can't stay. Jungkook swept his flashlight across the small room. There has to be another exit. The beam caught something almost invisible behind an old cabinet. A narrow iron ladder disappeared upward into darkness. His father's notebook suddenly made sense. Lighthouses always had maintenance shafts. This way. Jimin climbed first, while Jungkook carefully replaced the cabinet to delay whoever was breaking through the wall. Another violent crash echoed behind them. The wood finally cracked. Voices shouted. They're escaping. Jungkook climbed after Jimin just as hands reached through the broken opening below. The ladder led into a cramped tunnel inside the lighthouse walls. Dust filled the air. Rusted bolts scraped against their jackets. Above them, a small hatch revealed the rooftop platform surrounding the lantern. Jimin pushed it open. Cold ocean wind struck their faces instantly. Rain had begun to fall. Not heavily, just enough to make the metal walkway dangerously slippery. Behind them came the unmistakable sound of men climbing the ladder. They're coming. Jungkook looked over the edge. 40 meters below, waves crashed violently against black rocks. There was no safe way down. The only bridge connecting the lighthouse to the cliff had partially collapsed years ago. Jimin followed his gaze. We are trapped. For several long seconds, neither moved. Then Jungkook noticed something extending from the opposite side of the lantern. A thick maintenance cable still connected the lighthouse roof to an abandoned storage building on the cliff. The steel line sagged over the sea. Jungkook stared at it. It'll hold one person at a time. Jimin immediately shook his head. You go first. No. They're after you. They're after both of us. Another hatch burst open behind them. Dark figures emerged onto the rooftop. Rain glistened across black tactical uniforms. Each face remained hidden beneath masks. The tallest stepped forward. Give us the notebook. His voice was calm, almost polite. Jungkook stood between them and Jimin. Who are you? The man smiled beneath his mask. You already know. No. You simply haven't remembered yet. The answer chilled both of them. The masked man slowly removed a silver pendant hanging beneath his jacket. A white camellia. Exactly like the symbol on the map. Jimin frowned. Why do you have that? Because, the man replied quietly, your parents weren't the only keepers. The rain intensified. Water streamed across the rooftop. Jungkook tightened his grip on the notebook. If you're one of the keepers. The man interrupted. Then why am I hunting you? He nodded once. That's the right question. Another masked figure stepped beside him. The 7 keepers split into 2 sides long ago. One side believed the truth should be revealed. The other believed humanity wasn't ready. Jimin's expression hardened. And which side are you? The leader answered without hesitation. The side willing to do whatever is necessary. Lightning illuminated the ocean. For one brilliant second, every face became visible beneath the flashes. Jungkook suddenly froze. One of the masked men. He recognized him. Not the face. The eyes. Sharp grey eyes he had seen countless times inside Chairman Han's headquarters. The man's mask could not hide them. You. The man slowly lowered his head. Recognition spread across his own face. Mr. Choi. Jungkook whispered the name almost involuntarily. Chairman Han's personal secretary. The man smiled faintly. So you finally remember me. Jimin looked between them. You know him. He worked beside Chairman Han for 20 years. Mr. Choi removed his mask completely. His expression carried neither hatred nor anger. Only exhaustion. You've spent your whole life believing Chairman Han was the mastermind. He glanced toward the stormy sea. He isn't. Jungkook felt the world tilt beneath him. What are you talking about? Mr. Choi looked directly into his eyes. Chairman Han has been protecting you. The words struck harder than the crashing waves below. Jimin stared in disbelief. Protecting him? From whom? Mr. Choi's smile disappeared. He slowly raised one finger toward the dark horizon. Far out at sea, barely visible through the rain, a massive black ship emerged from the fog. No lights, no identifying marks, only a single white camellia painted across its bow. Mr. Choi's voice became almost a whisper. The people who truly destroyed your families have finally come to finish what they started. Neither Jungkook nor Jimin spoke. For the first time since beginning their journey, they realized the conspiracy surrounding their parents was far larger than one corporation, one inheritance, or one man. It had been waiting beyond the horizon all along. Rain lashed across the rooftop with enough force to sting exposed skin, while the black ship drifted silently through the dense curtain of fog. It looked less like a vessel and more like a shadow that had risen from the depths of the ocean itself. No navigation lights pierced the darkness. No flag fluttered from its mast. Only the white camellia painted across the bow glowed faintly whenever lightning tore open the sky. Jungkook could not look away. His pulse pounded in his ears. Who are they? He asked, his voice almost swallowed by the storm. Mr. Choi stood perfectly still despite the rain soaking his suit. They call themselves the Circle. The Circle. They've existed for generations. Jimin frowned. I've never heard that name. That was their greatest success. Another flash of lightning illuminated the sea. The ship had drawn closer. Much closer. Jungkook instinctively tightened his grip around the leather notebook. My parents died because of them. Mr. Choi slowly nodded. They refused to surrender something the Circle wanted. The 7 fragments. No. Mr. Choi looked directly into Jungkook's eyes. The 8th. Silence fell between them. Even the crashing waves seemed distant. Jimin spoke first. There are only 7 locations. Yes. So what is the 8th? Mr. Choi's expression softened. It isn't a place. Neither Jungkook nor Jimin spoke. It is a person. The words lingered in the cold air. Jungkook felt an inexplicable chill spread through his body. What does that mean? Mr. Choi hesitated for the first time. Your father believed the truth should never belong to documents alone. He feared every archive could eventually be destroyed. So he entrusted the final piece. Mr. Choi paused. To someone who would never willingly betray it. Jimin slowly turned toward Jungkook. You. Mr. Choi nodded once. When you were a child. Jungkook stared at him in disbelief. That's impossible. You don't remember. No. You weren't meant to. The words struck a forgotten corner of Jungkook's memory. A faint image surfaced. His father kneeling before him one quiet evening. A small wooden music box. His mother humming softly nearby. Then, a needle. A doctor's reassuring smile. Darkness. The memory vanished before he could grasp it. Jungkook staggered backward. I've seen that before. Jimin immediately supported him. What did you remember? I don't know. His temples throbbed violently. It disappeared. Mr. Choi watched with quiet sympathy. They erased the memory. Who? The circle. Why? Because they never found what they were searching for. The wind intensified. Far below, powerful engines rumbled from the approaching ship. Smaller boats were already lowering into the sea. They're coming ashore, Jimin observed. Mr. Choi nodded. They know you've opened the archive. How? Mr. Choi remained silent. Jungkook suddenly understood. The archive wasn't hidden only from enemies. It was also watching us. Mr. Choi gave a faint smile. Your mother prepared for every possibility. Jimin reached into his coat and removed the crystal music box. The delicate melody had finally stopped. He examined it carefully beneath the flashes of lightning. There has to be more. Jungkook looked at the box. His father had written, "Return to the melody." He carefully accepted it from Jimin. The music box was beautifully crafted from crystal and polished walnut, with tiny white camellias carved around its edges. As he turned it over, his thumb discovered an almost invisible groove beneath the base. A hidden compartment. His heartbeat quickened. He pressed gently. The compartment sprang open. Inside rested a tiny brass cylinder no larger than a finger. What is it? Jungkook carefully unscrewed it. A strip of tightly rolled paper slid into his hand. Its surface contained neither words nor drawings, only rows upon rows of musical notes. Jimin's eyes widened. The lullaby. No. Jungkook studied it more closely. It's different. The melody looked incomplete. Several measures ended abruptly, replaced by strange symbols instead of notes. Mr. Choi stepped closer. I've never seen that. Jungkook stared at the symbols. One resembled a lighthouse, another a mountain, another a blooming camellia. Exactly like the 7 locations on the map. It's a code. Jimin looked from the paper to the map. The melody connects every location. Jungkook suddenly smiled for the first time since entering the lighthouse. My mother didn't leave us a treasure hunt. He folded the paper carefully. She left us instructions. Before anyone could speak again, a deafening explosion erupted below. The entire lighthouse trembled violently. Wood splintered. Glass shattered across the lantern room. Smoke billowed upward from the lower floors. They've breached the entrance, one of Mr. Choi's companions shouted. Another explosion followed almost immediately. The ancient structure groaned. Centuries-old beams cracked under the force. Pieces of stone rained onto the spiral staircase. Jimin looked toward the collapsing interior. If they destroy the lighthouse, the evidence disappears, Jungkook finished. Mr. Choi shook his head. They don't care about the evidence anymore. What do they want? Mr. Choi's eyes settled on Jungkook. They want you. A sharp whistle echoed from the cliff behind them. One of Mr. Choi's allies pointed urgently toward the forest. Vehicles. Several black SUVs burst through the trees, their headlights cutting through the rain. Mori armed figures poured onto the coastal road. Some wore tactical uniforms. Others wore expensive business suits. At the center of them, all stepped a familiar elderly man, carrying only a black umbrella. Chairman Han. Despite the storm surrounding him, he walked calmly toward the lighthouse without hesitation. Jungkook stared in disbelief. You came. Chairman Han looked up at the rooftop. I told your mother, he called through the rain, that one day I'd bring you home. His voice carried no anger, only exhaustion. He slowly removed a sealed envelope from inside his coat and held it high enough for Jungkook to see. Across the front, written in elegant handwriting faded by time, were the words, "To Jungkook, open only when you learn the truth." Jungkook's breath caught. It was unmistakably his mother's handwriting. The envelope had survived all these years. And somehow, it had been in Chairman Han's possession the entire time. The rain softened into a cold mist, but the silence that followed was even heavier than the storm. Jungkook stood frozen on the rooftop, his eyes fixed on the weathered envelope in Chairman Han's hand. Every instinct told him to hate the man who had controlled every chapter of his life, yet the familiar handwriting on the envelope shattered the certainty he had carried for years. My mother trusted you, Jungkook called down, his voice rough with disbelief. Chairman Han looked up without moving. No. The answer came immediately. She never trusted me. A faint, bitter smile crossed the old man's face. But she believed I would keep one promise. Jimin exchanged a confused glance with Jungkook. What promise? Chairman Han lowered his umbrella, allowing the rain to soak his silver hair. To keep both of you alive. The words hung in the air. Mr. Choi's expression remained unreadable. It is time, he murmured. Chairman Han nodded almost imperceptibly. You've protected them long enough. Jungkook frowned. What is everyone talking about? Before either man could answer, a deafening horn echoed across the coastline. The black ship had reached the harbor. Dozens of armed figures poured onto the docks with frightening precision. They moved without shouting, without hesitation. Each wore dark coats embroidered with a tiny white camellia stitched near the collar. The circle had arrived. One of Mr. Choi's companions lifted a pair of binoculars. They're splitting into teams. How many? More than 50. Chairman Han slowly climbed the winding staircase toward the rooftop. His breathing was noticeably heavier than it had been years before. Age had bent his shoulders, but not his determination. When he finally stepped onto the lantern platform, he looked directly at Jungkook. You've grown into the man your parents hoped you would become. Jungkook's jaw tightened. You lied to me. I did. You made me believe they died in an accident. I did. You let me hate you. Chairman Han closed his eyes briefly. Yes. Jungkook's fist trembled. Why? For a long moment, only the wind answered. Then Chairman Han spoke. Because hatred kept you alive. Jimin stared at him. What does that even mean? Chairman Han looked toward the approaching harbor. The circle never stopped searching. They believed your parents hid something. They questioned every friend, every employee, every relative. His eyes returned to Jungkook. They expected you to seek revenge. They expected you to search. So I made you believe there was nothing to find. Jungkook's anger faltered. You buried the truth. To bury me with it. Chairman Han nodded. I buried your curiosity. His voice cracked for the first time. I hoped you would live an ordinary life. The old man's composure finally broke. I failed. Jimin stepped forward. You could have told him. No. Chairman Han shook his head. The moment he knew. He looked toward the circle gathering below. They would know. Jungkook slowly unfolded the coded sheet hidden inside the music box. The strange symbols seemed almost alive beneath the pale light filtering through the clouds. Suddenly, something caught his attention. The musical notes weren't arranged randomly. Every measure contained tiny differences in spacing. His father had once taught him that music could hide mathematics. He looked closer. The symbols formed coordinates, not locations. Dates. 7 dates. One beneath each destination. Jimin leaned over his shoulder. What are they? Jungkook whispered the final date aloud. Tomorrow. Everyone fell silent. Mr. Choi's face turned pale. It can't be. Chairman Han closed his eyes. So we've run out of time. What happens tomorrow? Jungkook asked. The old man answered quietly. The circle opens the vault. The vault. The reason your parents died. The reason the 7 keepers existed. The reason every fragment was hidden. Jungkook's heartbeat quickened. What is inside? Chairman Han looked directly into his eyes. I've spent 30 years praying you would never have to find out. Before he could continue, gunfire erupted from below. Bullets shattered the lighthouse windows. Glass exploded across the floor. Everyone instinctively took cover. The circle had reached the base of the lighthouse. They're coming up, someone shouted. Mr. Choi immediately drew a compact pistol, while his companions barricaded the stairwell with broken beams and heavy furniture. Chairman Han remained strangely calm. He handed the sealed envelope to Jungkook. I was told to give you this only when there was no other choice. Jungkook accepted it carefully. The paper was old and fragile. His hands shook as he broke the seal. Inside rested only a single handwritten page. The first line stole the air from his lungs. My beloved Jungkook, if you are reading this, then the man standing beside you has already sacrificed more than you could ever imagine. Jungkook's eyes slowly lifted toward Chairman Han. The old man looked away. He could not bear to meet Jungkook's gaze. Jungkook continued reading. You may believe Chairman Han became our enemy. The truth is far more painful. Your father asked him to become the villain. We needed someone strong enough to carry your hatred if it meant protecting your future. He accepted that burden without hesitation. Please forgive him if your heart allows it. Jungkook's vision blurred. His breathing became uneven. Every memory of anger, every harsh word, every silent resentment suddenly felt unbearably heavy. The letter continued. One day you will understand that love sometimes chooses to wear the face of cruelty. Some sacrifices are meant to be misunderstood until the very end. A tear slipped silently onto the page. Jungkook looked at Chairman Han again. For the first time in his life, he noticed how tired the old man truly looked. Not powerful, not terrifying, just exhausted, as if he had spent decades carrying a weight no one else could see. Another explosion shook the lighthouse. Smoke filled the stairwell. The circle was only moments away. Chairman Han slowly placed a hand on Jungkook's shoulder. His voice was almost gentle. Your parents gave me one impossible task. He smiled sadly. They asked me to protect both of my sons. Jungkook's eyes widened. Both. Chairman Han turned toward Jimin. My wife and Jimin's mother were sisters. Silence engulfed the rooftop. Jimin stood motionless. His face had drained of all color. You mean? Chairman Han nodded. You and Jungkook were never just childhood friends. His voice broke. You are family. The revelation settled over the rooftop more heavily than the smoke rising from the shattered stairwell. For several endless seconds, neither Jungkook nor Jimin moved. The only sounds were the crashing waves below, the distant gunfire, and the relentless groan of the old lighthouse as it struggled against explosions, shaking its ancient foundation. Jimin stared at Chairman Han as though the old man had spoken a language he could not understand. A family. The word escaped his lips almost soundlessly. Chairman Han nodded. Your mothers were sisters. Jimin's breathing became uneven. No. His voice cracked. My mother never had any siblings. That is what she wanted you to believe. Chairman Han looked toward the raging sea before continuing. The circle erased every official record, birth certificates, family registries, photographs. They wanted to separate every member of the Keeper's bloodline so no one could reunite what had been hidden. Jimin slowly stepped backward. My whole life. His eyes filled with tears. I believed I had no family left. Jungkook looked at him with the same disbelief. He suddenly remembered dozens of strange coincidences from their childhood. The identical melody they both knew. Their mothers wearing matching white camellia brooches. The strange feeling of familiarity every time they stood together. None of it had been coincidence. It had been memory trying to survive. Another violent blast shook the lighthouse. A support beam cracked overhead. Dust and splinters rained onto the floor. Mr. Choi glanced toward the staircase. They've reached the second level. His voice remained calm, but urgency sharpened every word. We have minutes. Chairman Han nodded. Then there is no reason to hide the last truth. He turned toward Jungkook. You've spent your entire life believing the 7 fragments reveal a secret. Jungkook tightened his grip around the coded music sheet. They don't. They reveal a key. A key to the vault. And what's inside the vault? Chairman Han's eyes darkened. Not treasure. Then what? The original covenant. Neither Jungkook nor Jimin spoke. The document signed by the 7 keepers. Mr. Choi quietly added, it contains every name, every crime, every transaction, every government official, every corporation, every family that built its fortune through the circle. Jungkook felt the weight of the notebook in his hands grow impossibly heavy. If that document becomes public, Chairman Han answered without hesitation, the circle collapses. And if the circle finds it first, they erase history forever. The room fell silent again. Jimin looked toward the approaching black ship, visible through the shattered windows. So that's why they hunted our parents. Chairman Han nodded slowly. They weren't protecting money. They were protecting the truth. Another explosion erupted beneath them. This one was different. The floor lurched violently. Wood cracked. Iron screamed. The staircase collapsed into the level below. Smoke burst upward through the opening. Mr. Choi immediately moved everyone away from the center. The structure won't survive much longer. Jungkook looked at the coded melody once more. 7 symbols, 7 dates, 7 locations. Then suddenly, something his father had once said echoed inside his memory. Music isn't only heard, son, sometimes it's meant to be seen. His eyes widened. He spread the coded sheet beside the map. Then he rotated the paper 90 degrees. The musical staff lines aligned perfectly with the red paths connecting the 7 locations. The notes no longer resembled a melody. They formed a route, a single continuous path. Jimin immediately understood. It isn't telling us where to go. It's telling us the order. Jungkook traced the route with his finger. Lighthouse, mountain, river, forest. He stopped at the final symbol. His breathing caught. The 7th location. His voice barely emerged. It isn't on the map. Everyone gathered around. Mr. Choi frowned. That's impossible. Jungkook slowly pointed toward the center of the completed pattern. There. The route created one final point where every line intersected. Not at any of the 7 locations, but directly between them. Chairman Han closed his eyes. So your father changed it. You knew. I knew the original map. This isn't the original. No. Chairman Han smiled, faintly despite the chaos surrounding them. He outsmarted everyone. The 7 fragments were never meant to lead to the vault. They were meant to reveal where the real map begins. Jimin exhaled in disbelief. So we've been chasing. The first clue. Chairman Han nodded. Exactly. For a brief moment, despite everything collapsing around them, Jungkook laughed softly. My parents really did think 10 steps ahead. They had to. Mr. Choi suddenly looked toward the broken window. There inside. Dark figures appeared through the smoke below. The circle had reached the upper level. Laser sights danced across the walls. The attackers moved with frightening discipline. Chairman Han quietly removed an old silver pocket watch from inside his coat. He looked at the cracked glass for several seconds, then handed it to Jungkook. This belonged to your father. Jungkook accepted it carefully. It stopped the night they died. The watch remained frozen. 11:47. Chairman Han smiled sadly. I never repaired it. Why? Because some moments deserve to be remembered exactly as they happened. Jungkook opened the back cover. Inside was another engraving. It read, Time ends, love remains. His eyes became wet once again. The lighthouse suddenly shuddered with terrifying force. One of the exterior walls collapsed outward, exposing the roaring sea below. Cold wind rushed through the room. Mr. Choi raised his weapon. They're here. Masked members of the circle emerged from the smoke one after another, surrounding the lantern chamber. At their center walked a tall woman dressed entirely in black. Unlike the others, she wore no mask. Her silver hair flowed in the ocean wind. A white camellia rested on the collar of her coat. She looked no older than 50, yet her eyes carried the calm confidence of someone who had waited decades for this meeting. She smiled gently at Jungkook. So, her voice was elegant. The last keeper finally remembers. Jungkook instinctively stepped in front of Jimin. Who are you? The woman's smile widened with unmistakable sadness. My name no longer matters. She paused. But your mother once called me. She looked directly into his eyes. her closest friend. The wind roared through the broken walls of the lighthouse as waves crashed against the cliffs below, sending columns of white spray high into the darkening sky. Smoke drifted between the shattered beams, and the fading melody from the crystal music box echoed faintly, almost as if the sea itself had begun humming the lullaby that had connected Jungkook and Jimin since childhood. The silver-haired woman stood calmly among the members of the circle, her expression carrying neither hatred nor triumph. Instead, there was only profound sorrow. Jungkook refused to lower his guard. "You were my mother's closest friend," he said quietly. "Then why did all of this happen?" The woman's eyes softened. "Because I failed her." Silence settled over everyone. "I believed secrets could protect people," she continued. "Your mother believed the truth could save them. We argued until the very last night." She lowered her gaze. "When the circle chose power over humanity, I stayed, hoping I could change them from within. But I was wrong." Jimin stepped forward. "They killed our parents." The woman slowly nodded. "Yes, and I have carried that guilt every day since." Chairman Han looked at her with tired eyes. "You could have stopped this years ago." "I know." Her voice trembled for the first time. "I was too afraid." Jungkook suddenly understood what his mother had written. Love sometimes chooses to wear the face of cruelty. Fear had destroyed just as many lives as hatred. The woman carefully removed a small brass key from around her neck. It matched the symbols hidden throughout the 7 locations. "This is the final key." She held it toward Jungkook. "The vault was never meant to belong to the circle. It belongs to the keepers." None of the armed members around her moved. They simply watched. Jungkook accepted the key slowly. "Why give it to me now?" "Because your parents were right." She smiled sadly. "The truth cannot survive inside frightened hearts." The lighthouse groaned again. Another section of the floor collapsed. Mr. Choi looked upward. "We have seconds." Chairman Han pointed toward the maintenance cable stretching from the lighthouse to the cliff. "Go." Jungkook shook his head. "I'm not leaving anyone." "You must." "No." Chairman Han smiled warmly, a smile Jungkook had never seen before. For the first time, he placed a gentle hand on Jungkook's shoulder. "You've made exactly the choice your father would have made." Without another word, Chairman Han turned toward the circle. He stood between them and Jungkook. Mr. Choi joined him. Then, one by one, several members of the circle lowered their weapons. The silver-haired woman looked at the armed followers surrounding her. "For decades," she said firmly, "we claimed we were protecting the future." She looked toward Jungkook and Jimin. "The future has been standing in front of us all along." One after another, the remaining members quietly placed their weapons on the wooden floor. No orders. No resistance. Only silence. Years of fear finally ended with a single decision. Jimin looked at Jungkook. "So." Jungkook smiled through tear-filled eyes. "We finish what they started." Together, they crossed the maintenance cable as the lighthouse continued collapsing behind them. The wind fought every step, but neither let go of the other. When they finally reached the cliffs, they turned back. The ancient lighthouse stood proudly for one final moment against the stormy sea. Then, with a deep echo that rolled across the coastline, the tower slowly gave way. Stone met waves. Wood disappeared beneath the ocean. The lighthouse that had guarded generations of secrets vanished into the sea, taking with it decades of fear, lies, and suffering. Only the truth survived. Weeks later, hidden beneath an isolated mountain valley, Jungkook and Jimin unlocked the vault using the 7 fragments, the final brass key, and the coded melody that had guided them across the country. Inside they found no gold, no priceless jewels, and no legendary fortune. Instead, shelves filled with handwritten journals, legal documents, photographs, recordings, and testimonies revealed the complete history of the Seven Keepers and every crime committed by the Circle over generations. There was enough evidence to expose an empire built on corruption. Jungkook closed the final journal and looked toward Jimin. "We could destroy countless lives." Jimin quietly nodded. "Or save countless more." They chose neither revenge nor silence. Over the following months, the evidence was delivered to independent investigators, journalists, and international authorities. The truth spread too widely to be buried again. Powerful corporations collapsed. Corrupt officials resigned. Families long separated by fear finally learned what had truly happened to their loved ones. Chairman Han voluntarily testified before every investigation. He accepted responsibility for every lie he had told, never once asking for forgiveness. When the trials ended, he quietly disappeared from public life, choosing to spend his remaining years tending a small garden filled with white camellias, the same flowers Jungkook's mother had loved. Mr. Choi established a foundation dedicated to preserving historical truth, ensuring that no future generation would inherit a history rewritten by those in power. The surviving members of the Circle dissolved their organization forever, acknowledging that secrecy had nearly destroyed everything they once believed they were protecting. One spring morning, nearly a year later, Jungkook and Jimin returned to the old countryside estate. The abandoned garden had begun to bloom again. Hundreds of white camellias swayed gently beneath the morning sun. The air carried their delicate fragrance, and birds sang from the old oak tree where a weathered birdhouse still hung. Jungkook knelt beside the restored angel statue. He placed his mother's silver key beneath the roots of the oldest camellia. "I think we are finally done," he whispered. Jimin smiled. "No." Jungkook looked at him. "We are finally free." They stood together in silence, watching sunlight filter through the blossoms. For years they had believed destiny was something written by powerful people hiding behind secrets. Now they understood something far greater. Destiny was not created by wealth, inheritance, or ancient organizations. It was shaped by ordinary choices. The courage to trust, the strength to forgive, the willingness to sacrifice, and the quiet decision to stand beside someone even when it meant giving up everything else. The wind carried the scent of blooming camellias across the garden, as though the past itself had finally found peace. Jungkook smiled toward the endless horizon. He had once believed losing everything would be the greatest tragedy of his life. Instead, by letting go of fear, anger, and revenge, he had gained the one thing neither power nor destiny could ever replace: family. And beside him, under the blossoms that had witnessed every beginning and every ending, Jimin smiled too, knowing that no secret would ever separate them again. The story of sacrifice had ended, but the story of hope had only just begun.